Hey everybody, this is John Marucci. We're going to talk today about an issue we ran into when we were in Florida a little bit, and that is, what do you do when you are camping out and the weather gets a little colder than you're comfortable with when you're in your RPod? So we were down in Florida recently, and there are a few nights where we hit the temperatures in the high 20s, and it stayed that way for several hours, and we're a little concerned being in the RPod if we've had issues with water freezing in the lines, etc. So today we're going to look at 5 tips to help you deal with kind of a flash freeze situation if it's an overnight freeze. Now this is given that you're in your RPod, that it's not in storage. There's also something to talk about here as far as winterization, because there's a good debate going on about when you should winterize. So generally, just up front, we didn't winterize when we were down in Florida at all, even though it got cold. So we kind of rode out the cold temperatures, and the few steps we took, pretty simple steps, but there are a few steps we took that helped out quite a bit. So let's look at these top 5 things that we're going to list here as far as flash freeze situations. So number 1 is you really need to know your temperatures. So we're staying outside Orlando for a little while, actually quite a bit north in D-Land, Blue Springs State Park, when the first overnight freeze happened. And it's not good to have the temperature at Orlando when you're 30-40 miles away from Orlando. So you need a more localized temperature to know how cold it's actually going to get outside. So 2 things for that. The first thing is we use an app called Weather Underground, which was actually recommended to us from the RPod Owners Forum. Several people talked about how good it was. The main reason is the Weather Underground app. It gives you very local weather stations, not just the big cities, but right around where you are. So that's a great app for understanding, like, how is your temperature going to be close to where you're camping. So use the Weather Underground app to get your local temps and see what it's going to be like overnight. The other thing that's really a good investment is to have a temperature gauge that's both indoor and outdoor. Now we had that. We have a temperature gauge that went indoor and outdoor, and we just leave the outdoor sensor outside of the cab where you're going to know the real outdoor temperature where you are. Now this is really important first step, because you kind of need to know what you're getting into that night. So there are 3 or 4 nights when we were down there in January at Blue Springs where we had to deal with this and think about what are we going to do, how are we going to react to the potential overnight freeze. So the first step is a good app like Weather Underground and get a local temperature gauge. Okay, so then the next thing really to understand is, when should you do this and when should you actually winterize? Now our general rule is that if it's just going to get below freezing for a few hours overnight, we're probably not going to winterize. If it's going to get significantly below freezing, say in the mid-20s, for say more than 4 or 5 hours, 6 hours, then we got to think about winterizing. Any more than that, low 20s for more than a day or so, definitely got to winterize. But really it's a personal choice of what you're comfortable with. First, what we did, these temperatures just went into 30 degrees, 29 degrees. That was about it. Maybe one time it got down to 28 for an hour or so, and we chose not to winterize, and we were fine, by the way. We didn't have any issues, but we did take these steps. So that's the first step. Know the temperature, get a good weather app and a temperature gauge. The second step is, if possible, especially if you're at full hookup, drain your tanks. Now the reason is because if you think about your tank outlets, those are exposed in the RPods. They're out below the body, and they're going to be affected by the air temperature. And if you have any liquid in there, built up in there, that could freeze if it's not diluted in some way. So if you have the possibility to dump your tanks, that's a good idea to do it. All right. And the other thing to know about that is the city water. All right. So if you're connected to city water, we unhooked the city water, both from the spigot and opened them up. Our own personal spigots we had around the city water outlet, and we definitely opened those so there wouldn't be any accumulation of water and freezing in there. And then we actually disconnected the water hose to the RPod and the water filter at the RPod. So we definitely disconnected city water. Always a good idea to do that. The third thing we did is, and remember we have a 179, is under the bed there's an access panel about big, and we undid it and took it off so that the temperature in the RPod, the heat in the RPod would get back to the utility area. Now utility area in the 179 is in front, under the bed, in front of the furnace back there, and that's where the water pump is, the water heater, etc., and a lot of the tubes, a lot of water lines that go through the unit. So we took that off so that the hot air would get back in that area. The fourth thing, step 4 we did, was we open up the closet doors at night. So we opened up the closet, the cabinets, and the drawers in the kitchen to make sure that air, the warm air in the cab could get into those areas in the RPod. And finally, the fifth thing is we actually turn the heat up. So, you know, I don't like sleeping when it's, say, over 70, 72 degrees, but at night when it was getting cold, we turned the thermostat considerably up. Maybe didn't have as many blankets on that night, those nights that we did this, but we turned the thermostat up so that we'd have more heat in the cab and it would circulate well through the unit. So there's the 5 tips. Once again, real quick, you know your temperature, step number 1, tip number 1. 2, if you can, drain your tanks and make sure you disconnect from city water. Number 3, open up the utility access panel, wherever that is in your unit. Make sure that the temperature, the heat in the cab can flow to that quickly and easily. And then open up your cabinet doors and drawers. And then finally, turn your heat up. Make sure your heat's up. And with that, of course, check your propane, because it's not going to work well. You're going to go through more propane, obviously, but check your propane. Make sure you're good on propane when you're doing this so you don't run out in the middle of the night. Okay, so there's 5 tips, hopefully helpful. Pretty basic tips. If you run into a time where you're going to be camping and in your RPod and you're overnight and it's getting a little iffy as far as where the temperature is and what you want to do with it. So anyway, hopefully that helps. If you enjoyed this video and it was helpful, please give it a thumbs up. And feel free to subscribe. We enjoy having you watching these videos and we like making them for you. Again, this is John Marucci. Thanks for watching. Have a great day.